Hi, my name is Merle Reapy, and I'm the president of Solve. And we're excited to introduce you to the WAVE work style assessment. And so, as part of getting ready for your one-on-one feedback, we've just put together some quick information and tips. So, as you are reviewing your assessment, you'll be familiar with the different components of the WAVE and a little bit of background behind it and why we at Solve really love the assessment. So with that, I would like to share with you some more information about the wave. So what you're going to see here is that first, the wave was developed in 2009 by SciOp fellow Peter Saville. Peter Saville is an expert in assessment design, worked at a number of different firms and created some really popular and accurate assessments over the year for us as psychologists to use. The WAVE itself was distributed in the US by Saville, which is now Willis Towers Watson, and more recently actually is even now Aon. So by the time you're watching this, I'm not sure who will own it, but certainly it's had a couple different owners as mergers and acquisitions have happened over the years. Solve as a firm has been using the WAVE since 2010. And so we've seen it used in a number of different scenarios and have a lot of confidence in its accuracy. And we're going to share with you a little bit about why we prefer it over other assessments. We will share with you that it is a bit more complicated than your typical assessments, where you might only have 4 letters, a 2-page report, a bit of a summary. And again, it's because of the level of rigor that goes into creating this assessment, and also the amount of detail that comes out of it that can be a bit overwhelming compared to maybe some of those other assessments. So we ask that you bear with us, you look into it, because what we find is, given the accuracy and the specificity of the results of this assessment, that it is incredibly powerful and useful as you think about yourself and the way that you lead and interact with others. So as I mentioned, the WAVE has had a number of innovations compared to other assessments over the years, and which is part of the reason why we think it's the best. It's a part of a larger suite, but what we're going to be talking about today is really specifically the professional styles assessment that you probably completed in taking this. And so that assessment is a talent motive questionnaire. We're going to get into a little bit about what that means in just a little bit. And as you know, because you took the assessment, it takes about 45 minutes to complete and has 108 different facets that go along with it. So part of the reason that we love the WAVE is the validity. And so you can see here, this was some information that was collected to show the different validities on very common assessments that are used for selection and promotion decisions. That is an important caveat, because with some assessments, like the Strengths Finder, the Predictive Index, the DISC, Myers-Briggs, many of those assessments would barely land on this chart, and if they did, they would be over here in the 0.15 to almost 0 range in terms of their validity coefficients. And while those tools can be great for development and communication, workshop preparation, those types of things, we at Solve do not recommend any of those assessments be used for hiring and promotion decisions, primarily because they just aren't that accurate. There are better assessments out there, like the ones you can see on your screen here, and the additional cost of really robust assessments is not that much more. Some of the biggest challenge is just the additional certification and or the requirement of psychometrics as a course, or even a master's or PhD to be able to administer some of these assessments. But there's a reason that they put that level so high, because it is important to make sure that people are interpreting the results accurately. And so we look forward to kind of going through this with you and sharing a little bit more. So anyway, so you'll see here that the WAVE, the professional styles, is the highest in terms of validity that we've come across. And again, these are not only in the individual studies that have been done, but are also compared with peer-reviewed articles, which is a really high bar to be able to establish. Okay, so getting in and talking just a little bit more about the professional styles model and what you're going to be seeing here. So the WAVE looks at 4 primary clusters. Each of those clusters is broken down into 12 different sections. Those sections then dive down into dimensions, and then all the way down at the very basic level is the facet level. And so we're going to touch on those in just a little bit here. But the main 4 clusters are thought, influence, adaptability, and delivery. So just to take one as an example, we're going to use the influence cluster as an example. So influence is the primary cluster. Underneath of that, we have 3 sections under influence: sociable, impactful, and assertive. Then under each of these sections, so in this case, impactful, drops down, and there are 3 dimensions under the impactful section: convincing, articulate, and challenging. And then for each of these 36 dimensions, there's another 3 facets. And so when you take that 36 times 3, that's where you get the 108. So as an example for articulate, there is presentation oriented, eloquent, and socially confident. So you can see the amount of granularity that this assessment's able to get into. When we talk about articulate, we can really say, well, what does that mean? Are we talking about presenting to groups? Are we talking about taking really complicated information and making it simpler? Are we talking about confidence in meeting new people? Or is it a combination of 2 or all of those different dimensions? And so as we think about development opportunities, hiring and promotion decisions, we can get really specific in what the needs are for the role and the organization to make sure that we're providing folks with the most important information for whatever decision or development that they might be taking on. I'm not going to go into all of this, but this just kind of breaks down each of the clusters, sections, and dimensions. Not enough space to define all the different facets that are included in the WAVE. But again, it just shows that level of detail that this assessment allows us to get into compared to most any other assessment out there on the market. You'll be familiar with this, and just in case you're not, the WAVE uses a dynamic response format. And so the very first thing that you get is a normative scale. So the WAVE uses both normative and ipsative scales. Again, it increases accuracy and reduces social desirability. And as you look at this, you'll just see that there are, initially you got some free choice ratings. Anything from very strongly disagree to very strongly agree. So you go in, you mark your responses, and then for those responses that you said were similar to one another, what it does on the next page is it creates some ipsative, which is basically forced choice ranking options for you. And then at that point, for the ones that you said, you know, gosh, these are really close for me, we're now going to ask you which one is most like you and least like you. So we're going to break some ties in that manner. So again, that really helps us narrow in on what are the things that you really feel are talents for you and the things that you're really passionate about. All right, so then looking at kind of a little bit about the WAVE and what it's looking at and really how it's been developed. So what we have here, again, we've talked about motives and talents. And so again, this is that potential that we're trying to assess, because again, this is a self-assessment. So you're going in and answering and responding to these about yourself. And so it's really your own assessment of your potential in these different areas. What we then do, or really what Saville, but organizational psychologists do, is we go in and say, okay, well, obviously there's some other things that are going on in this person's environment. So there's the culture, there's the job itself. And we want to make sure that we understand those different moderators that might be going on in a person's environment. We're not really measuring those here, and we understand that that's just error that's going to be introduced in any assessment, but we do want to account for that. But what we're really trying to get to is to identify this work competency or job performance. So saying, okay, if we anticipate or guess or predict that somebody is going to be talented in strategy, after they've been in the job or the role for some time, let's say 1 year, and we go back and we talk to their manager, or ideally we have some good performance data on their ability to execute on those strategic outcomes, how good was our prediction? So in other words, if we said they were going to be incredible at strategy and we talked to their manager and got performance metrics and they said, oh yes, they are great at performance, then that's good. That is a higher level of validity and increases that validity coefficient that I showed you earlier. On the other hand, if we say that somebody is probably not going to be really strong at strategy, we talk to their manager and boss, and it comes out to be true that they weren't that great on strategy. Well, in assessment world, that's still very good news, because what that's doing is also increasing our validity coefficient to say what we predicted is coming true. So that's a little bit about the science behind it. And then, of course, if there's any that are off, where we say, oh my gosh, this person is going to be amazing at strategy, and then we talk to their managers and things like that, and they are not strong, that's going to reduce that validity coefficient. So that's why that validity coefficient is such an important number. And really using the predictive validity model, which is what I described, whereas we make a prediction and then we measure performance later, versus just taking high performers and then having them take an assessment, which is called concurrent validity. That predictive validity is really the most amazing data that we can get as practitioners and scientists with assessments. Okay. So with that, this is just a screenshot of what you're going to see when you look at your report. So on the very top of the page, you're going to see what cluster it is. So there's ultimately 4 pages to this report. The thought, influence, adaptability, and delivery page. This is a screenshot from the second page, which is the influence cluster. So you're going to see red on that page, just to keep in line with the kind of the color coding to make it simple as you read through this. And then under each of these areas, you're going to see the different facets, dimensions, sections that all incorporate this larger cluster. So for example, you'll see sociable. So under sociable, we have interactive, engaging, self-promoting. So again, just another great example of the granularity that the WAVE gets into in comparison to maybe other assessments you've taken in the past. So for example, on Myers-Briggs, it's introvert, extrovert. And for years, it was really you were one or the other. Just recently have they recognized that it is more of a continuum than it is an all or nothing on either one side. But again, that kind of goes against the theoretical background of the Myers-Briggs to begin with, but no need to get into that kind of information. But really the point is here on the WAVE is when we think about introvert, extrovert, we talk about it more about social skills. And there's a number of those. So for example, the first one, interactive. This is what most people think of in terms of introvert, extrovert. So somebody high on interactive is very lively, loves networking, going into big groups, meeting as many people as possible, tend to be more on the expressive side, really talkative. That in WAVE language, we refer to as interactive versus social or extrovert. Because what we find is that there's 2 other components to that, one of which is the second one here, which is called engaging. And so engaging is things like approachable, easy to get along with, builds good rapport with folks. So for many people, while they might not be outgoing life of the party, they're really friendly, easy to connect with. That's that engaging scale, which we feel like a lot of the assessments really miss out on differentiating between those things. And so, for example, in different sales roles, that especially sales roles that are focused on longer term relationships, what you might find is that this engaging is actually more predictive of success than somebody who's a great networker. And that networking might be great for roles that include a lot of cold calling or say car salesmen and things like that, where people are coming in and it's kind of a quick sale and you have to make that connection really fast, and provide the highlights in a quick, short amount of time. So anyway, and then the final piece of it is self-promoting. So again, that's that level of comfort and confidence in being the center of attention. So kind of being on stage, if you will, and getting a lot of feedback and praise can be important to those folks as well. So anyway, that gives you just a little bit of sense of just how much detail this assessment can get into in compared to others. Now, what you'll see on this is a scale at the top from 1 to 10, and those are STEM scores, which is short for Standardized 10 score. So what that information means is that each of these little bars here show what STEM scale you basically are at in comparison to the norm group of your assessment. And so there's a number of different norm groups that you might be compared to, and that information will be at the bottom of the page, and it'll say norm group and whatever that norm group is. This is another feature that differentiates this assessment from most other assessments is, for example, there's a senior manager executive norm group. So it's taking your results and comparing it to other senior managers and executives across the United States. Or globally, depending on the norm group. And so that's quite different than some of these other personality assessments that might compare you to the general working population, or even more broadly, just the general population of all Americans or human beings. And so again, that may or may not be relevant for the role. So again, that's why we really like the specificity of this. So you can see these actually, and the reason we picked this out, it provides 3 great examples. So someone at 6 is going to be close to average in this area. And so what that means is it kind of depends. There are times when they may love networking, really enjoy, kind of connecting with others and talking. And then other times they like to be more quiet and reserved. On the engaging side, at a 3, again, they're going to have lower energy, they have less confidence about their talent in this area. So for them, they might not feel confident that they make a good first impression. They may feel like it takes a while for people to really get to know them. And so that can, obviously, all of this can be useful in understanding how that person's going to show up and identify ways to onboard and get to a really good, comfortable place. And then finally, on the self-promoting, we can see an 8 here. So again, with an 8, I believe that means that they're at the 85th percentile. A 3 is at the 15th percentile. More on that in a moment. But what this self-promoting shows is that they are very comfortable being the center of attention. They also need a lot of praise. And they're going to share a little bit about their achievements. And so that's obviously another important data point to have. All of that compared to, well, is someone introverted or extroverted? Okay, so a little bit more on STEM scores. So at the very bottom here, you can see how the STEMs are broken up. So this is a normal distribution curve. You're probably all very familiar with that in your probability and maybe even statistics course or class in 6th grade. Is probably where you first got introduced to it. Hopefully you saw it a few more times since then. But what this shows here is that most people, on average, statistically speaking, most people are going to be in this range between our 2 red bars. Now, from a STEM score perspective, that means a 4, 5, 6, or 7. And the reason we say that is all of these numbers are within what we call 1 standard deviation of average or normal. We don't like to use the term normal because, how do you define normal? So average is probably a better term to use here. But you can see that 4, 5, 6, and 7. When we look at that, anything in this 4, 5, 6, 7 range is basically typical of most people in terms of their self-perceived talent and motivation for a certain area. Now, when we look at our 1s, 2s, and 3s, and 8, 9s, and 10s, these are the folks that are going to be 1 or even 2 standard deviations above and beyond average. So that means they have a unique talent or a unique motivation when compared to other people in the same norm group. So obviously that's very helpful information as you think about hiring decisions, promotion decisions, or development goals. So you can see here our 1s, 2s, and 3s. We have a sense of 1 is actually, I believe, at the 1 percentile. 2 is, I want to say it's at about the 5 percentile, and then 15th percentile, looks like it's 16 there, 15.87 to be exact. And then at the 8th percentile, we get to the 84th, 97 here, and then the 99th percentile as we look at those 10s. So again, and that's looking at a full population. So the assessment itself, it's, you're not trying to get all 10s. In fact, statistically, it's at least improbable, if not impossible, to get all 10s. Because to be in the top 99th percentile on 108 different facets, obviously that's unlikely. So instead, what we're really concentrating on as we look at these type of reports is saying, what's important for your role? What's important for you? So as you look at all these different dimensions and facets, you might say, self-promoting in my role, that's really not that important. And if that's the case, then our feedback to you would be, don't really worry that much about your results in this section. Whether you're a 10, a 1, a 4, an 8, whatever that score is, if it's not relevant to you, don't pay it much attention. Okay? All right. So, and these are just some descriptors in terms of when we think about it, or even as you go through and you look at your STEM scores, when you think, well, what does that mean? How might I describe it? These are just some descriptors that you might use as you look through that. And you'll actually see these in the language of the report a lot of times as well. Okay, so very quickly, a couple different things on what's a talent, what's a motive. So talents are measured by the effectiveness items within this questionnaire, okay? So it's looking at what your perception is that of the behaviors that you're effective at. So you might have thought as you were taking the assessment that, I had this question before, or I saw this statement before. And that's actually not true. You saw the same ending of the item, but the beginning of it changed. And what it changed was with these stems. So the talent items were measured by I am good at, I am effective at. Whereas the motives were measured by I want, I enjoy, I am motivated by. So again, under a talent, it might say, I am good at presenting to large groups. Under the motives, it might say, I enjoy presenting to large groups. It's a very small difference, but it's also a very important one, especially as we think about development opportunities, people's skill set as they're coming into the role, because it can impact onboarding, the right fit for the role, a number of other things that are important in those types of decisions. So again, motives are those need items. And they're looking at the wants, the desires, those preferences, things that you enjoy and are driven by and motivated by. And so we take the combination of those items, and then that helps each item or each facet has one motive and one talent. And then we collect those together, and then we build up through that pyramid that you saw earlier to get an overall understanding of an individual and what their work style characteristics are that give them the most energy. So with that, hopefully you're going to get a chance to go through and take a look at your assessment, and you're going to be having feedback with one of our organizational psychologists and be able to answer all the questions that you might have through it and talk through your goals and the things that you'd like to move forward with as you consider your own professional development. So if you have any questions, please reach out to us, and we thank you for your time today.